Hi, this is Greg Hunt, and you're listening to No Disputing That, the podcast for anyone with an interest in mediation and arbitration. In this series, I sit down with some of the best known names in the field, and some that you might not know yet, to discuss mediation, arbitration, and other forms of alternative dispute resolution. We may even cover other issues in the law and in life in general. Expect some laughs, some honesty, and quite a few editing errors along the way. Welcome back to No Disputing That. Today I'm going to be talking to Colin Rule. Colin is an old friend and we've decided not to plan anything. We're just going to have a chat and see how it goes. So Colin is a fascinating person who is renowned across the world as the expert in online dispute resolution, and we'll certainly be covering ODR during our conversation. So we'll be going straight in. No introductions. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you.
Hi, Greg. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for taking the time to chat. It's been too long.
It has. It's been about 20 years, I think.
Oh, my goodness. That's crazy. That's
Yeah,
crazy. You don't look a day older than you did the last time I saw you.
Well, that's because when I was younger, I looked older.
That's a good trick. Yeah, I like that.
So it's something I've carried through my life. So people now think I'm the age I am for the first time.
Well, the good thing about not having much hair is the gray is not a tell. You know, for me, it's like people are like, oh my God, what happened to you? You got so old, because I got so much gray hair now. But what can I do, man? Like, what can I do?
Your headphones are hiding it, so it doesn't look like you've got
I should get the full headphones. Yeah, how are you? How's your family? Everybody doing
good.
well?
Yeah, really good. Thanks. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I know when we met the first time. I can't remember exactly the last time, but it was in the European Parliament in Brussels.
That's
and
right.
It was about 2002.
Wow.
And it was so my eldest was born in 2000, so he's now 22.
Okay.
And I've
That'll
got
date
twins, 18-year-old twins as well, who are at uni at the minute. So
oh my gosh. Yeah, well, I got a 23-year-old and a 21-year-old, so we're about the same vintage.
Similar.
Yeah. So all right, presumably you feel the way that I feel, which is kind of like they're taking over the world, and I just need to get out of the way.
Yeah, definitely. It's quite funny because a couple of months ago, someone described me as a veteran mediator. And that was the first sign, it was, oh my God, someone sees me as a veteran.
Well, every time I get, like somebody says, oh, we've decided to give you, the Lifetime Achievement Award. I was saying, am I dying? Is this the end? Is this sort of, is this the capstone? So I appreciate the award, but it makes me feel like I just kind of got to get out of the way. The younger people are coming. So yeah, that's all to the good. But well, I'm glad to know you're doing well.
No,
glad to know you're doing well, Greg. Yeah, I mean, I actually remember the first time we got together. I thought it was I visited the Chartered Institute sometime around 2001, 2002, and I think I remember us going to like the cafe at the British Museum or something like that. Yeah. So, but that was like the first time that I think I met you. But you're right, it was 20 plus years ago.
Yeah, and do you remember why? Because it was quite a big thing at the time, because it was just at the start of the internet becoming more popular.
And
that's right. Over here, Ford Motor Company decided that they wanted to start selling cars online. And this was back in the days of dial-up internet, where everything took 3 days to load a page. And they wanted to sell cars online. And they approached us at the Institute, where I was at the time, the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, and asked us to set up an arbitration scheme that would deal with any disputes that arose from the sale of the cars.
Right.
And it was interesting because it became Europe's first online dispute resolution scheme.
Oh, wow.
And you were very, very sort of into all the ODR stuff.
Oh, I was. Yeah, that was why I visited. Right.
So that's why you were there. And then that was why we ended up in Brussels, because that was the launch of it. And you had a stand next to our stand. But the funny thing was, it was a big launch. It went really well. The scheme was great. But no one ever bought a car.
It's too early.
It was too early. It was too slow. People couldn't do it. And they were using of course, people didn't want to put 5 or 10 grand on a credit card
Yeah,
on the
right.
internet. And
Yeah.
the other thing they were doing, which Ford really didn't expect, but really caught them out, was they were getting a deal off the online portal. And
Okay.
then they were going to the dealer and saying,
Yeah.
if I buy
Hey,
this
I got this
online, it's
deal.
going to cost
Yeah.
me this. Yeah. So they were actually selling against themselves.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yes,
Yeah. So
absolutely.
it didn't
Well, it's
work.
funny.
But
All those dynamics played out, and the irony is we are doing Ford vehicle warranty arbitration cases now through
yeah.
our platform, through the ODR.com platform. So
Wow.
it's funny how it's not. One of the things they say in Silicon Valley is the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. And I
Yeah.
think, they were right. That's where
Mm,
everything was headed. It just took 10, 15 years longer than they thought it was going to
yeah.
take. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's funny. I also remember that visit to the Chartered Institute. In the lobby, they had like arbitration awards from like
Mm,
the 13th century or
yeah.
something,
The
of
royal
like people who,
charters and things.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Who can your sheep graze on my land? And I
Yeah.
remember thinking, wow, this arbitration thing's been around for a while. I
Yeah.
think I gave a couple talks and I talked about the arbitration awards that were
Mm.
posted on the wall of the Chartered Institute in London.
We touched on there when we first met, and I mentioned in that you were very big, as you still are,
Yeah,
in the whole development of ODR, online dispute resolution,
right.
which I was the UK's rep appointed by the government department here. Didn't have a
Uh-huh.
clue about it, to be honest. I was just getting nice trips to Brussels every week. And it was very academic to me.
Yeah.
And it was like the Ford scheme in a way. It was a bit before its time.
Right.
But then you turned that from sort of your involvement in that into this stellar career that you've had for the last 20 years as being
Oh.
the person everyone knows on the ODR front. So what have you been doing since we last met?
That's a great
How
question.
do I keep up?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've known each other for so long, so I got to really dial the dial
Yeah,
back,
yeah.
to when it was. Yeah, I mean, I think around 2000, 2001, the ODR started to become a thing. And there
Mm,
were, the real father of ODR was Ethan Catch, and still
yeah.
is Ethan Catch. And he had written a bunch of books on law and technology through the 80s and 90s, and he sort of coined the term
Mm,
ODR. And there was an academic center, as you say, at the University of Massachusetts that was called the Center for Information Technology and Dispute Resolution. And I'm a nerd. I love technology. I just
mm,
grew up, but that was like playing video games and running bulletin boards on my old Apple II Plus. So I love dispute resolution, and I'd been working in that through the 90s. But
mm,
then when the internet started to come up, I was like, wow, this is me. This is perfect. I should be the guy, who lives
mm,
at the intersection of these two things. So I met Ethan and got involved with the center, and
mm,
so we started to have meetings, and they started out very small. I mean, there weren't a lot of people that were coming to these ODR meetings,
mm,
but slowly but surely, people started to get more interested. And I wrote a book called Online Dispute Resolution for Business that came out
mm.
2002, I think. And then I started a company called Online Resolution, and I didn't know we talk about young people, I was sort of,
Yeah,
this seems like a real thing. Let's do this. And,
yeah, yeah.
again, we all thought it was going to happen in 2, 3 years.
Mm,
It actually ended up taking 20 years.
mm,
Um, but then I got a call one day from eBay, and they read my book and they
mm,
said, we want to talk to you. So they flew me out to California, flew me out here to Silicon Valley, and they sat me down and said, "Okay, tell us about this ODR thing." And they had been working with Ethan on a pilot, and they were doing hundreds of thousands of disputes,
mm.
and they were working with another company called Square Trade that was kind
Yeah,
of a pioneering ODR company, and they were a competitor of mine. I was running online resolution. They were working with Square Trade, but Square Trade had asked them for a lot of money, and eBay was like, "We're not going to pay that." So they were looking for alternatives. So that was when they found me.
yeah,
So actually, I said, "Okay, thanks a lot. My consulting is over. Here's my bill. Good luck."
yeah.
And I went back to Boston, and then they called me again. They said, "We want you out again." I was like, "Okay, if you're going to keep paying me money." So I flew out,
Mm,
and then they started interviewing me, and I was like, "Well, am I being interviewed? Like, I didn't consent to that.
yeah.
And they said, well, here's how much we want to pay you. And I was like, well, I guess I work for
Interview
eBay now.
away.
Right. My little startup was not paying me that much money. So I said, packed up my family and moved out here to Silicon Valley. And that was 2003. And then I worked for eBay for 8 years
Mm,
and built their online dispute resolution system, what we called the Resolution Center. And I actually worked at eBay for like 3.5 years. And then I moved over to PayPal, which eBay owned at the time. And then I built the resolution system there. But, you know, that was a real education for me. Like I love technology, but I never really worked in a big internet company, you know, like with all the coders and UX designers and all of that. So then at the end of eBay, I spun out some technology that we had built that had won some innovation awards internally and things, and started another company called Modria. I did that in 2011 with one of my best friends from PayPal, a woman I had hired named Chitu Nagarajan, who is based in India. So we started Modria together, and then we commercialized ODR. You know, we started building systems. We did a lot of work with the American Arbitration Association. We did a lot of work for tax disputes. Tax appeals turned out to be a big area for us, but we did a lot of work with e-commerce companies. But eventually we started to get pulled into the courts, and the courts were really interested in ODR and how does this innovation work. And so in 2017, we got acquired by a company called Tyler Technologies, and they're really like the biggest court tech provider in the US. So, you know, they acquired us, and then I went to Tyler, and I was there for 3 years and kind of helped them build out their ODR program. But then Jim Malamed, who was the founder and CEO of Mediate.com. I had been general manager of Mediate.com back in the late 90s before this ODR stuff really took off. And he said, look, will you come back and be CEO of Mediate? I said, sure, let's do it. So that was 2020, you know, came out and joined Mediate. And so now we've started ODR.com, and, you know, we have Mediate.com, we have Arbitrate.com, we have ombuds.org, you know, so we're really trying to, you know, lead the technology side of the field. You know, we're just, and we partner with most of the major dispute resolution organizations in the US.
Yeah, the great advantage you've got in North America is the volume, because volumes here still aren't that massive in anything really.
That's right.
So there's been a lot of technology developed, which cost a lot of money to develop, but then the case numbers weren't there for people to sort of decide to go ahead with it. And a lot of the ADR providers here ended up just over time developing their own systems.
That's right.
To meet their own needs. But I think one thing I've always been envious of as someone who works in the ADR field is the potential volume you've got in America.
Sure.
You know, I remember meeting someone at a conference in Atlanta, and he was one mediator. And he was doing more mediations than CEDA were doing.
Wow. My goodness.
You know, that was one mediator in Florida. And, you know, when you think just the scale of everything that you've got over there.
Yeah, well, we got a lot of people. I mean, it's interesting because I feel the same way about China and India. You know, I mean, the scale of what they do is just, wow, it's overwhelming. I mean, you've got more than 1 billion people, and, you know, those economies are rapidly digitizing. So the ODR systems in China and India are operating at a scale, you know, that we haven't seen in the US yet. But I mean, at eBay, we were doing 60 million disputes a year. You know, at eBay. Yeah. So we had 12 to 18,000 new disputes a day. So, you know, the only way that we could do that was through technology. And, you know, eBay was making money hand over fist. So they gave me tens of millions of dollars and said, figure this out. You know, so again, I like the UK because it's a very intimate community and everybody seems to know each other, you know, and I think it's very collegial, and, you know, it's co-opetition, right? You're cooperating at the same time you're competing.
I like that way.
Yeah. It's but I you know, in the US sometimes it can feel fragmented. You know, like what's going on in Florida is not the same as what's going on in California. It's not the same as what's going on in Michigan, and everybody's kind of looking at what everyone else is doing. But you know, I was really excited about this judicial modernization fund that the Ministry of Justice had, and you know, Richard Susskind brought me over, and I met with the Lord Chief Justice, and we were talking about ODR as the future of civil justice, and there were all these reports, and you know, the judges were really excited about it. I remember going to a conference in Liverpool, and the Master of the Rolls was there, and he said, "ODR is the future of civil justice." I'm like, "Wow, we don't have senior people in the judiciary that are talking like that." But it never really panned out, you know. I think if you look at the ODR providers, you know, I think they presented a lot of conferences, but they haven't really gotten the big caseloads, you know. Oh, lights went off. Motion detector. Yeah.
Power cut. No, you're right. I think, and that last comment is one of the distinguishing factors. I think you've got ODR providers and you've got ADR providers. And I think from my experience over the last 25, 26 years, the ODR providers have not provided something the ADR providers want at a price that they're prepared to pay for it.
Well, right.
With the volume that is here. I mean, you were talking about, what, 60 million eBay disputes.
Yeah.
My business is currently the largest arbitration provider in the UK by volume.
Wow.
And we do about 1,000 cases a year.
Wow.
And you're talking about 60 million cases. Now, I know eBay is probably a lot bigger than anything else in that respect.
Well, it's not apples to apples too, because a lot of these disputes are, hey, I bought my item and it didn't show up. I mean, they need to be resolved, but yeah, and again, the arbitration providers, they do lower volume, but you're right. I mean, we did a program for the American Arbitration Association. This is just insurance arbitrations in New York for medical reimbursement in the wake of motor vehicle accidents, and that program alone is 300,000 arbitrations per year. And that's just New York. And so, we've done through that scheme, we've done more than, 2 or 3 million disputes over the years. So, yeah.
What you're telling me is I need to open a Hunt ADR in America.
Isn't that, I've read enough books, about, young British people. They want to come to America. That's where you get big, right? Like the bands that, they're
Neil
playing
Diamond,
the Midlands. Yeah, exactly. Right. And then you go to the US and then you're playing stadiums, so, you got to come over, Greg, right? This is where the big money is. Yeah. So we do have scale, but little pockets of volume. But it just seems to me like the judiciary, and I understand a little bit about HMCTS and the MOJ and the dynamics of all of that. It's just complicated. It's difficult for there's
just no money. There's no money. So at the moment, we're talking about mandatory mediation and bringing in mandatory mediation within maybe the next 6 months. And that's going to be for disputes under £10,000, which these days is about $10,000.
Right.
But there's no money to provide the infrastructure for it or anything like that. So there's always a lot of talk. And then the reality is that these things either don't happen or they happen and they're not given the resources to succeed.
I understand.
And that's a massive thing that we need to get over, really, as a country.
Well, it is interesting. There's a lot of innovation that comes out of the UK. As I say, there's a lot of great thought leaders. I don't know if you know Mimi Zhu and Mark Beer at the Oxford. They have a program on deep tech and dispute resolution, and they're really forward thinking. They're doing some really cool stuff. I like the RDO guys. I think they're doing some amazing things. And obviously there's a lot of thought leaders like you and Graham Ross and people who've been thinking about this for a long time in the UK. But I agree with you, the case volumes aren't there. So you can have all the innovation you want, but unless you can get paying cases in the door, you need to set that kind of beneficial cycle up, because you learn a lot from getting the work.
I was the one who was always thinking back to those days in Brussels in particular. I was always the one that people sort of got annoyed by, because for many reasons it's followed me throughout my whole career, to be honest with you. I don't know what it is. Maybe I say what I see.
You never annoyed me. I don't know. Maybe I never.
There's time.
Right. Exactly.
But I always thought a problem in those early days, and I think it's still a problem now. And it goes back to this distinction between ODR providers and ADR providers, is I don't really see a distinction between the two, in as much as my scheme that I run in the travel industry is a dispute resolution scheme that resolves disputes between people who go on holiday and the major tour operators in the country.
That's great. That's a great market.
So it's an arbitration scheme, but we do it online. So therefore, it's also ODR.
Yeah, it's what we call OARB, online arbitration. Yeah.
And that was my view back in 2000, 2001. But everyone else wanted to silo the two things off. Certainly here, so there was the people who wanted to develop the technology, and there were people who wanted to provide the dispute resolution schemes, and things just never sat properly between the two of them, because they were looking at them as two different things, and they are two different things. But it was because one group of people were actually technology providers.
Sure.
They weren't ADR providers, they were technology providers, and they were building something
Absolutely.
On the technology that existed at the time.
Right.
And like I said earlier, wasn't necessarily wanted by the people who were
Well,
providing
you have got a product market fit, and if you build a product that's not what the market wants, you're going to fail. Yeah. So,
have you
well,
heard of an organization called Talk Terms here in the UK?
Talk Terms? No,
Yeah,
I haven't heard of that.
Well, I'll introduce you to them. They're based in Northern Ireland, and they've been developing some sort of something which, if I was still an employee of one of the big ADR providers, I might not like it. But as Hunt ADR are doing, it's where you have a non-human negotiation phase before. And that was always something, again, that held back ODR here, is that the ADR providers wanted something where their members were still getting work and it wasn't something being done by technology.
That's right. Yeah. And a lot of people, I mean, Richard has scared a lot of people with this talk about the digitization of the professions and all of that. And I get that question every single time I present to mediators or lawyers. It's like, well, the technology is going to take away our jobs, right? I'm like, no, that's not. It's going to change things, but you know, for the better. But yeah, so I'll check it out. Talk Terms. It's interesting.
I'll do an intro. It's funny because a couple of months ago, I had Ben Girata on the podcast, and he's a well-known arbitration lawyer in the city, and he was talking about the potential in the not too distant future for AI arbitration awards.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You know, and so that it's still stuff that fears the people who are involved. Because if you talk about AI producing arbitration awards, what happens to the arbitrators?
Well, digital arbitrators, everybody asked me that question too. Are you building digital judges? But, you know, and I think that AI is, I mean, I don't know if you've seen this new GPT chat that just came out from OpenAI. I mean, it's making huge splashes here in Silicon Valley because it's light years beyond what we've had before. And now there's DALL-E, which it's an image generator that everybody's talking about, and Midjourney and Stable Diffusion. There's a lot that's going on with AI right now. And you know, people talk about metaverse and people talk about blockchain and all of that. A lot of that stuff, I think, is still 5-10 years down the road. But AI is here today, and we're going to need to figure out, it's not just dispute resolution. I mean, it's the entirety of the law, the entirety of, you know, medicine and everything is going to be changed. All the creative professions is going to be changed by this technology. So we better figure out what this means for us. I think that if we in the field can harness this and utilize it, it can extend the reach of what we do in some pretty impressive ways. And, you know, but I do think it's going to be disruptive, and there's going to be winners and losers. And some of the people that kind of sit on the sidelines and say, well, I'm not interested in that, I'm not going to get involved with that. Well, that's not going to work out so well for them because the parties are going to want it.
Yeah, ignorant. You can't be ignorant in any way, can you?
Yeah.
And actually, you're talking to AI now because this isn't really me. I'm not really here.
That's pretty good AI because you seem pretty authentic to me. Yeah. But yeah, I remember at eBay, I used to send out emails to users, and they would say, "Are you a bot?" And I would say, "No, I'm not a bot." And they'd say, "That's what a bot would say." And then I'd have to say, "Oh, well, you know, did you see the Red Sox game yesterday?" And, you know, something that a bot wouldn't say. But people already are filled with skepticism about who am I interacting with online, you know. But you know, it's interesting. One of the things I'm curious, what's your characterization of how the pandemic changed the conversation in the UK? Because I think it really did change the minds of most mediators and arbitrators over here. You know, now Zoom is like the default. I mean, if you're meeting a new party, you're going to meet on Zoom, like before you get together face to face. So I often say Zoom is the gateway drug, you know, to more ODR. But post pandemic, it's interesting. I haven't been doing as much in Europe as I did pre-pandemic. It hasn't really kicked off yet. But I was just curious. Do you think that it's been a game changer in terms of the discussions around ODR?
Absolutely. I mean, you know me as someone who's worked in arbitration, mediation. On the admin side, I'm actually also a mediator, so I've got my own practice as a mediator.
Sure.
And what I find is that 9 out of 10 mediations since the pandemic have been online.
Yep.
Generally use Zoom. Mediator training. I train mediators, and right back at the very beginning. So in March 2020, I had a mediator skills training course planned in London, usual way, face to face, as it always was. Then COVID hit and it had to be cancelled. So I thought, okay, I'll put it online. I'll use Zoom. I'll give it a go. No one's done it. Let's see if it works.
Sure.
And then the Civil Mediation Council said, no, you can't do that. You can't train mediators online.
Right.
So I challenged that, and I got some support from other people in
the alternative is no training.
Yeah, no training for 2 years, or longer, who knows. And in the end, they accepted it, but there were tight controls on it, and you still had to be assessed in person at some point in the future, and all this sort of stuff. Now, it's done all the time. Everyone does it. And it's just the way it is. And I had someone on my last podcast, actually, which only went out today, who was saying how, think back to the beginning of the pandemic.
Right.
If you'd have done a Zoom before then, it would have been very formal. If a dog would have walked in the room, people would have thought you're unprofessional.
Absolutely.
If someone accidentally came in who shouldn't have been there, does that mean that the whole...
like the BBC guy, right? With his 3-year-old
and now none of that matters anymore. It's an icebreaker, it's relaxed. You see people having Zoom calls who are in Starbucks or wherever,
with a cat on their lap. Yeah, exactly.
I think it's changed everything, to be honest.
I think it has changed the norms in a big way. But, we're still kind of dealing with that. In the States, all the businesses are trying to get the workers to come back, come back to the office. They're trying to bribe them or threaten them or something. But the workers don't want to do it. They don't want to do it. It's like, if you make me come back, I'm going to quit, So
this is the first time I've done one of these podcasts, not from home. So I'm generally work at home, and I have Zooms all day and whatever else. But I'm in London today because I've got a meeting with someone later who's coming from India, and we've not met before, so it was a good opportunity. But it was a pain getting here because it's been snowing and a bit of snow.
Right.
Your stuff.
And the trains are expensive.
Yeah. I mean, it'll cost me £40 today just to come into London for a meeting. But it'll be worth it because I'm going to meet someone. But generally speaking, you would just do it by Zoom, and it's been great, for things like this. If I'd have wanted to do this podcast before COVID,
right?
Yeah, I would have been able to do it because people were podcasting before then. But it would have been harder. Now all you have to do is set a Zoom up, save the audio file,
hit record,
and that's it. It's nice and easy. So people are much more prepared to do it and go on it now.
Well, everybody's got a little area in their house where they're set up with their camera and their computer, and it's been completely normalized.
What's weird though, Colin, is when you do a Zoom. So when I do the mediator training course, it's 5 days, and the whole 5 days could be online. And then 6 months later, I'll meet someone who was on the course. In the flesh for the first time.
Right.
And when you meet them for the first time after you've been talking to them online, it's always a shock. Didn't think you were that tall, or didn't think you were that small, or you're a bit thinner, or you're a bit fatter, or whatever it might be. You just, because your impression of someone is this little square,
right? Chest up.
And quite often with a false background and all the rest of it. And then
that's right. I got my fake background. Well, and the other thing is, we talk about, one of the things about in-person interaction is men and women. There can be a physical intimidation aspect. When somebody comes in, they can sort of use their size as a part of the influence. But Zoom completely normalizes all of that. It's how close you are to the camera, and it's always shoulders up. So as you say, I met a customer the other day, and they were much shorter than I thought they were. But I've been interacting with them for 2 years. I had no idea, So
And doesn't it show you as well there that does it matter?
It doesn't.
That would have been a sort of in your head about them.
Yeah.
And actually, it was irrelevant. The fact that they were shorter than you would thought they'd be.
Absolutely.
Doesn't mean that you've not been doing work with them for the last 2 years. You know,
well, it does. It level sets interactions to a certain extent, you know, and I think that's probably a good thing. I mean, you and I, we both do a lot of trainings. I do a lot of online trainings too, and you know, there are some aspects about video that I think work really well in a mediation. You know, it's changed the mediation process. You can have lots of short meetings and say, you know what, why don't we take a 30-minute break? Everybody go get a cup of tea, you know, take the dog for a walk, and then let's reconvene. You know, you can't do that if it's face to face, right? I mean, you're all sitting in the room and it's kind of a pressure cooker. The other thing is I found that overtalk on video doesn't really work because the algorithms can't sort out, so you just can't hear the other side. So in the room, people will yell at each other and it's hard to get them to stop because they keep hearing, but when they start yelling at each other online, it just breaks up. So it sort of forces people to take turns a little bit more just by virtue of the way the technology works. So it's fascinating to think about the way all of this is rewiring our brains.
I have thought, because you know, traditionally the way we mediate here and the way you mediate and the way they mediate in Europe, you know, does have slight differences.
Sure.
And one of the things we tend to do here is, you know, mediator goes to the venue on the days, they're first, goes to meet the parties individually, and then we have a joint opening session.
Right.
And then that might last for, you know, depends on the dispute, half an hour to an hour. And then quite often people then go back into the private rooms and the mediator spends the rest of the day going from room to room.
Yeah, caucusing, right.
Yeah. Now in Europe, they tend to just keep people together longer, you know. My view is every mediation is different and you just deal with it the way that you do it on the day. But what I've found with Zoom, and I've spoken to quite a few mediators about this, is more and more parties are saying in the UK, are saying, let's not have that joint opening session. We'll just be in our own room all day. And so that's an interesting dynamic change because the joint opening session for the mediator in particular, an opportunity to work out who's got the power in this relationship and who's.
Well, to me, that's kind of what mediation is the joint session. You know, an all caucus model is a very different experience.
But I'm finding, and other mediators said this to me, that with Zoom, people are more often saying, let's not have a joint opening, we'll just stay in our private rooms.
Very interesting.
So I wondered if it was just me, but I have spoken to others and they've said the same thing.
Well, that's a big debate here in the US. I think West Coast mediation, particularly commercial mediation, you get a lot of all caucus. Jams right now is championing an all caucus model for mediation, whereas on the East Coast, AAA and, you know, a lot of the mediation providers, they always start with a joint session. And the mediators there, they say, look, if you give me a joint session, I'll give you a better outcome, you know, because, you know, you got to play that out. You know, you got to see what the dynamic is between the parties. If it's all caucus, then the lawyers really, you know, drive the bus. And that's kind of what Jams is championing, because a lot of their neutrals are retired judges. So they like the caucus model. They don't want to get into the back and forth, you know. So I don't know. It's interesting that you say that.
Have you found as well, have you heard any about, there's been, this hasn't happened to me, but again, I've heard from others where you might have one party does physically come, but the other party is on Zoom.
Yeah. There's a lot of talk about those hybrids. You know, it's interesting. One of the things that I found, which is intriguing, is at the beginning we did a lot of that, where it's like, okay, one party is willing to come into the office, but the other one's going to be online. So it's going to be the mediator and the party in person, and then the other party on Zoom. But it's tricky to navigate that, right? Because if you say, why don't we take a break? Well, you're in the room with the other party, right? And then the person who's remote, they don't have that access to you. So it does create that imbalance. So what I've seen is, and this has happened to me several times, if you have local parties and they're together and somebody's remote, the local parties will still do it on Zoom. So, you know, they'll say, let's just go into different rooms and we'll both be on Zoom, even though we're in the same geographic location, because it's just easier for everybody to be communicating through the same channel. So either it's all online or it's all face-to-face, but those hybrids, because they create some of the complexities around, you know, level playing field, I find that people are steering away from that because it's too difficult to navigate. So I don't know. I did an event actually at Texas A&M Law School where we were going to have, and it was one event one day and one event the next day. And the first day we had a bunch of people in the room and a bunch of people dialing in. And it was just awkward to figure out, okay, the person who was dialing in was kind of booming through the loudspeaker and there was feedback. So the next day we all just did it online, everybody. So even though we had 10 people there in person, they just sat in their offices and did Zoom. And it went way more smoothly than if we had tried to do the hybrid thing, So I don't know. I kind of feel, and that's one of the things I say in my training. If you have a party that can only dial in on the phone, it's better to not have the mediator and another party on video and the other person dialing in on the phone. Just put everybody on the phone because you want it to be level playing field. So lowest common denominator communication.
Where's it all going? What do you see as the future of ODR?
Well, I think things, the move online is not going to be slowing down. If you look at the last 20 years that we've been friends, I mean, when we first got together, no Facebook, no iPhones, none of it. We didn't have any of that stuff. No. And now that's like commonplace. That's just, so I think if you look at the pace of change over the last 20 years, it's been pretty crazy, to think about how fast we've come. I think the next 20 years is going to be even faster. I mean, if you think about quantum computing, if you think about artificial intelligence, if you think about blockchain, you think about metaverse, and I think the younger generation is open to this stuff in a way that you and I, the crusty old veterans, we're not going to get there. So, I just think we need to be open to it. We need to experiment. We need to be willing to question a lot of the pieties we have in the field about the way the work has to be done. I do believe the opportunities outweigh the risks, but there are plenty of risks. So we got to think about, we need to be building our own technology in the field. We can't let people who don't know anything about dispute resolution come in and tell us, no, this is how it should work. So, I'm excited about it. I'm a glass half full kind of guy. So, I think we're going to civilize all this technology and it's going to help us, help resolve disputes, more disputes, faster, fairer, more justice, more access. But it's going to be a bumpy ride. There's no question. Greg, and nobody can predict how it's going to play out. So we just got to, just keep pushing ahead. My grandfather always used to say, don't build your business where the highway is, build your business where the highway is going. So that's what we got to do. Yeah. Well,
on that note, Colin, I would like to thank you for being my guest this week. I'm no disputing that.
Thank you so much, Greg. I really enjoyed myself.
Cheers. Thank you for listening to No Disputing That. Please subscribe to hear more from experts in the field. If you'd like to suggest any future areas for discussion or to appear on the show yourself, you can follow us on Twitter at No Disputing That and send us a DM. Finally, if you need a mediator, give my management team at Arbiter International a call on 020 7936 7070 or email info@arbitra.co.uk. See you next time on No Disputing That.